Aloha, everyone. I am here. Welcome to All Intuitive Conversation. I am so excited about this new show and what I am going to participating with guests about having this all intuitive conversation. So, y'all, the very first guest is Leah. So, what I want you guys to know about these guests is that we have not had a whole bunch of conversations beforehand. I don't know anything. So, basically, this is going to be a live interview for me to get the opportunity to connect with Leah. And so, I wanted to share with you a little bit because it just so happened that Leah had posted on LinkedIn a little bit of information about her. So, who is Leah? So she already told us that she's a native of Queens, New York, a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, mental health clinician, 7 time, I'm loving that number, 7, published author, podcast host, transformative speaker, audience attraction coach, sexual assault thriver and activist, 2 time award winning entrepreneur and content creator. So without further delay, start screen. Welcome to the stage, Leah.
Hey,
Welcome. Aloha.
how are you?
I am doing fabulous. I am excited about this new opportunity to get to know you and the people here that are watching and live and on the replay.
I love it. I love it.
Okay. So look, you posted a lot of things about you.
hmm
So let's hear from you. Tell me, who is Leah?
Oh, that's such a deep question. But I will say, before all the accolades, I am just a little girl that was from Queens, New York, born and raised in New York City. I'm the daughter of 2 addicts. So my mom has been a drug addict since I was 2. My daddy was an alcoholic and in and out of prison since I was 9. So from birth, you can tell the odds were stacked against me because I was what they used to call back in the 80s a crack baby. So I was born addicted to crack cocaine.
Hmm.
And so from the womb, like doctors said, I wouldn't live past the age of 5. And if I did, I would have all these issues. I would be delayed. I would have all these problems. But God, right? And so I
Right.
was raised by my maternal grandparents and my aunt. I'm in a little part of Jamaica, Queens, New York. Um, and I always felt different. If I be honest with you, Felicia, I always felt different because I grew up in an area where most of my friends had 2 parent households. So they had mom and dad. I just had grandma, grandpa, and auntie. So I definitely stood out. And I didn't like it. I was like an angry kid growing up. I really
Hmm.
was. Like I took a lot of my anger and frustration out on my grandparents because I just didn't like this feeling of being different. I didn't like that like I couldn't come home to mom and dad like my friends got to come home to mom and dad. So how I began to channel that was writing. Didn't know I was going to be an author, I tell you that. But I started
Right.
writing. My grandma said she always saw me with a book and pen everywhere I went as a kid. And so writing was my way of creating a fantasy world for myself. So I created a lot of fantasy stories around my parents. So that when people would ask, well, where's your mom and dad? I always had some elaborate story. Like my dad was a CIA agent on a top secret mission. Like seriously. I always
Yeah.
because I didn't want to face the reality of what was really going on, which was that I was the daughter of 2 addicts. So um, that upbringing was the catalyst to where I am today because I made a decision very young that I was not going to be like my parents. And so I did everything that I was, told to do, went to college, got the bachelor's degree, the master's degree, and
Right.
then, still went through a lot of traumatic experiences, sexually assaulted, homelessness, domestic violence. Um, but my relationship with God was really the thing that made me say, if I'm going to do anything with this thing called life, it has to be purposeful. So that's literally how I've gotten down the path of being 7 time published author and speaker and all these other beautiful accomplishments that I've made. But it did not start like crystal clear. It started with trauma.
Wow. Like I said, you that's something that you definitely don't necessarily get from like this post of just who you are, kind of thing. So when did you? Because look, sitting here in front of me now, you hear, you know, normal,
Right.
right? So what was that transformation like? When did you stop being angry? Or
Whoo!
have you?
You
Yeah.
know what? I honestly did not stop being angry until I became an adult. I spent a lot of
Mhm.
my childhood, adolescent years really bottling up my emotions. I was afraid to be vulnerable. I grew up in a household where, my grandparents did the best that they could, but because of their own emotions and feelings around my mom basically giving up her children and them having to raise them, they had their own frustrations, their own feelings around that. So I grew up in a household where I wasn't really allowed to share how I felt. There wasn't really much
Mm.
conversation around my mother's drug addiction or my dad being in and out of prison. I didn't even meet my father's side of the family until I was in my 20s
Oh,
because that part of my life was hidden. My grandmother, I see it as more protection now, but when I was growing up and trying to figure out who I was, outside of the stories that I were given, the one part that was always missing was my dad. So I definitely had a lot of bottled up emotions, a lot of arguing. I got into a lot of fights. My grandmother's biggest fear was that I was either going to end up dead or in jail because the minute somebody said something I didn't like, it was just like off with
it
their
was
head.
set off. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was like fighting you for all the things that I was holding in. So you might have said something stupid to me in the moment, but I was gonna beat you behind for my daddy not being there, this person, like all these bottled up emotions. So probably I would say the moment that I really started to deal with my emotions happened probably 8 years ago. So 8 years ago, I was sexually assaulted. And that was literally the first time I walked into a therapist room.
Mm.
And that was probably the beginning of me really recognizing that not only did I want to be a therapist, hence the reason why I have the degree, but um, that I really did want to do something different. So I was sexually assaulted by a gentleman that I had met and had casual conversations with when I lived in North Carolina. And so that traumatic experience led me to go to therapy. And in that therapy room is really where I began to unpack all the other stuff. The feelings around my parents not being there, the abandonment
Yeah.
issues, the rejection, and recognizing that my emotions were as intense as they were only in moments where I felt like I wasn't seen, I wasn't heard, I wasn't validated. And so therapy was really when I started to deal with the anger, because what I learned in therapy and even as I went into the field myself was that anger is more of a secondary emotion. It's not the primary. So when you really start
Yeah.
to peel back those layers, underneath that was this little girl who felt abandoned, who felt rejected, who felt unloved, that felt like nobody was listening to her. And that's why she was angry.
Yeah. That's one of the, I had this, well, you don't know per se, because we're first meeting each other, but I have this philosophy called live smart.
Hmm.
And the M is that the master of the emotions, and is exactly what you're talking about. Oftentimes we squash that down. And then especially like for me as an African American female, I really was avoiding the whole anger and mad because that was a whole nother stereotype in
Yeah.
regards to that, right? So it was like it was just stay focused on getting the job done, right? But like you said, it's that next level of questioning of what am I mad, angry about? First, you gotta recognize that you're mad and angry, being able
Yeah.
to say that. But then what is this ultimately really about? But that takes a minute, that takes a heartbeat to be like, okay, I want to learn, more about this. And so it's interesting that you said that it was because of the sexual assault that then got you to the process.
Yeah.
How do you look at that now? Because like I said, you have a lot what people would call trauma
Hmm.
that have experienced that. Do you like blame that trauma that you experienced? Or have you, like, maybe transitioned to the point where if those things hadn't happened, I wouldn't have done this, which wouldn't lead me to be a therapist to be able to help, like, others? Like, how do you see that for
Yeah,
you?
for me it was the catalyst. Because even after being raped, then I was engaged to be married just recently, 3 years ago. He passed away. So
Mm,
losing multiple loved ones continued me, in the therapy process, and realizing that really my whole being was centered around loss. Like from my parents not being here, my dad, then my grandparents eventually divorced, and that was a loss. Like my whole life
mm,
was centered around loss from the time I was a child. So, really, what therapy helped me to do was recognize that these traumatic experiences in my life were catalysts to really push me on the other side of pain. I always say that pain has purpose. And a lot of times we don't get to the purpose because we end up stuck smack dab in the middle of our pain. And so therapy helped me to kind of push beyond the pain and say, okay, if I have to go through these experiences, if I had to really live through this trauma, what am I supposed to learn from it? How is
yeah,
this supposed to grow me? How is this supposed to develop me? And what am I supposed to do with it? I tell people all the time, many of us all have trauma, but
mhm,
what you do with the trauma is what's key, right? Because the trauma can either keep you stuck and stagnant, or you can take it and say, all right, if I'm here on this earth to do something, what am I going to do with the pain that I have had to live through? And so that's literally how the birthing of the books have came and the coaching has came, because I decided that I wasn't going to be stuck in the midst of my pain. I was going to figure out what was the purpose behind it, and then how do I help others like me make it on the other side of their pain.
yeah, love that. So, yeah, so you transitioned all of that, and now you're serving. So tell us how you serve, like I said, with the coaching or with the books. What does that look like today?
Yeah, so it's funny because I avoided coaching, to be honest.
Do
I
do tell. Why
Listen,
was
I
that?
did. So my professional background has been in the field of mental health. I'm going on 10 years in that field. And so for me, like therapy coaching kind of was like very close in proximity. And I was just like, I don't know. But what had happened was I had a lot of people coming to me wanting to tell their story in book form. And
Mm,
because I had did it 7 times over, they're like, Leah, you know this thing inside and out, like help me. And I was running from it. I was like, God, listen, nope, I don't want to do it. I don't want to be a coach. Like the coaching arena is saturated. I'm like good. Um, and so what really happened was April of this year, I was a speaker at a conference that was all about writing. And I taught a class all about attracting the right audience and the importance of knowing your targeted audience, whether that's as an author, whether that's as a business, like you're not in this to reach everybody, because you can't reach everybody. So being specific about who you want to reach. And that moment, I had so much feedback where people were like, you need to be teaching this. Like this is your niche. This is what you need to be
mm,
doing. Like package this thing up. And still I was like, yeah, no, I don't like I'm running from this whole coaching thing. So I came back from that conference and I was like, you know what, God, obviously you keep telling me that this is what I need to be doing. So I'm going to take a step out on faith and I'm just going to do it. And so the
mhm,
way that I began to serve was that I was helping other women mainly um start to really walk through the process of telling their story and really help them not just figure out their audience and their messaging, but really figure out what has been stopping you those limiting beliefs. Because what I found was that I was attracting a lot of women that had been sitting on this idea of a book for years and was too
mm,
afraid to put it out there, too afraid to be vulnerable. And the biggest thing they kept saying over and over is, Leah, you're so transparent, like you're not afraid to just say it. And I would tell them, because what's the worst that's going to happen if I say it? Somebody else
mm.
is going to get healed. Somebody else is going to get the permission to be free. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? So I had to I started teaching people in my coaching and serving in that capacity by letting them know, like, you can live a life of being unapologetically you. Like, your pain really does not have to define you. Like, you defined it. And then do something amazing with it.
Mhm. Well, it sounds like you did that. With that piece, let's go a little further into the running part.
Hmm.
W What was the reason for the running?
Because I'm naturally a runner. So I typically am the type of person, anytime something really makes me uncomfortable, I run. I'm like, nope, I'm out. And that is too something I had to discover in therapy, because the most anything that made me uncomfortable, I would did not want to face. It was like, yeah, I'm out. Can I like can we go around this somehow? And having to learn that it's really how you grow is in one, embracing those uncomfortable moments, but two, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like
Mm,
that's really where the stretching comes, is when you're not comfortable, when you really are uncomfortable. And so I had to learn to stop running, and just embrace it and recognize that, again, if I'm in this type of environment, it's truly for my growth and development. And so, yeah, that was the reason why I was running, because it was uncomfortable and I wasn't used to being vulnerable. I wasn't used to putting my emotions out there. I wasn't used to even just being that transparent. Like when people see the transparent Leah today, I'm like, child, if you only knew where I was a couple of years ago, right? But I'm learning that, vulnerability and transparency is really where your strength is. It's not in the masking and pretending like it ain't happening, because it's happening. So just be vulnerable enough to show your scars.
mm. Well, Carl, who's joined us live, welcome, says vulnerability, my favorite word. So
Hmm.
you are definitely resonating with Carl with that. So tell me, what is the line then for Leah? Because in the sense of we talk about sharing and being vulnerable, but
Hmm.
how do you know when to share and what not to share and still be what the people say is authentic?
Authentic. Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it's prayer. It's discernment. It's discerning the time and the moment and the people, right? Because what I have learned over the years is that everybody can't handle your scars. Everybody can't
Mm,
handle your transparency. For some, it's very uncomfortable, right? And it may not even be uncomfortable because it's you. It may be uncomfortable because you're triggering something in them that they have not dealt with. I had that experience this past summer with a really good girlfriend of mine. We were having conversation about our daddy issues, and just
mhm,
the conversation alone triggered such an intense emotion in her, because it was just like, like you're tugging on something that I really don't want to talk about, right?
mhm,
And so, really discerning where I am in the moment and who's around me. Sometimes and being transparent, God might lead me to just pull somebody aside and tell them something versus publicly telling them something. So it's just being discerning about where I am and who I'm around, and then, allowing the Holy Spirit to lead me and say, okay, share this, don't share that. And that's literally how I've been able to draw that line and keep that balance, because I do believe you have to have balance in that.
yes, for sure. So keyword discernment, knowing when, because that is true. It's sometimes people think what they call like overshare, where you just
Hmm.
tell everything to anybody and anywhere, and it's just like, but then it's like the other way, like if you just keep it all completely shut down and you're not honest about who you are, and people may think that that's not you being your authentic self, and really is who can embrace and feel or accept what it is that you're supposed to say.
Yeah.
And I love that, like, you're using the Holy Spirit and how everybody wants to say that, God, universe, whatever that is for you, to be able to say, okay, give me the wisdom in order to know when to share, when not to share.
Yeah.
And I know, like, for me, even in this conversation, I'm the same way. Like, I may get a message and before be like, okay, and I call God Emmanuel for
Hmm.
God with us, and it's like, am I supposed to say this or not to say this? But then what was so freeing for me is that now I will ask, are you open to intuitive feedback?
Yeah.
If they say yes, okay, I will share, right? If they
Yeah.
say no, I'm like, okay, hey God, Emmanuel, I did my part. They were not ready to receive that message at this time, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Because it is true, like you said, we have to go through phases. If somebody like the therapist, if you would have had the therapist maybe the day after something would have happened, you might not have been ready to have that
Mhm.
that conversation and to be able to receive. But it's like knowing when you're like, okay, I call it my Jesus moment. You throw your hands up, you're like, okay, I'm ready. Put a
Mhm.
download, tell me what it is, because clearly with me controlling and all the situations, this is not working. Right. So
Yeah.
now I'm ready to receive and to hear with that for sure. So yeah, so we have Gabe. Aloha, Gabe. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, talking about the share. So, Carl says sharing your story has to come with discernment because everyone can't handle your story, but everyone can benefit. So, you have to
Yeah.
let God shape your delivery.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Look, absolutely. Most.
Listen, that's my strategy even for writing a book. Like people always ask, Leah, what is your strategy for writing a book? Prayer.
Mm,
Like I seek him. Lord, what is it that you want me to share? Because he knows. He knows who's going to pick up the book. He knows who's going to read the book. He knows. So
mhm,
it's like I tell people, for me, it's returning the gift back to him because he gave me the gift of the writer. So it's me saying, hey, I'm gonna put this book in your hand and you guide me. Because
yes.
he know who's gonna benefit from the book. I don't. I don't wake up and be like, oh, I want to write a book today. It's usually an unction from the Holy Spirit that this is something I need to do.
Mhm. So, what was one of the most challenging books that you wrote then of your 7?
Ooh.
Look, this is what I do. Ask those questions, right?
So I would say defining moments. And that was my third book. And the reason why that was the most challenging was because that tells the story of my journey with grief and loss, losing 5 loved ones in 1 year. So from 2018 to 2019, it started with
Mhm.
my fiance who died, and then my dad died, my father-in-law died, my one of my really close sister girlfriends was murdered, and then my brother's best friend committed suicide all in 1 year.
Mm,
And so I was writing this book about grief and loss while grieving. And I
yeah.
remember the struggle of writing this book. First, I was like angry with God, and I'm like, dude, like, really? So we got to write this book while I'm going through this process. And one of my really dear sister friends, Sharita, who's an author herself, I remember texting her, and I'm like, I can't write this book. This is too much. It's too raw. It's full of all these emotions. And she said to me, and that is the best story to tell. Like,
Mm,
that is the reason why you have to write this book, because I literally was walking out my process of going with healing from grief and loss while writing the book. And that was so difficult. Most of the times when I write stories, I've already healed from the experiences that God wants me to share. So this was the very first time of literally be smack dab right in the midst of my healing process. And he's like, write this book. And I'm like, what?
mm,
like, like right now, like I can't go through this process and write. And he's like, no, write it. And I will say, because of its the rawness in it and the lessons that I shared in it, it's to this day one of my best selling books, because people have been able to get some of the hardest lessons I had to learn going through grief journey.
right. Well, do y'all listen to that? Do y'all notice the connection between that? The most difficult, challenging, or challenging book to write is her bestseller to date,
Hmm.
right? But it's that connection of those things that are really, oh, I got to go through this and all that, to where you're right. That's where people are going to feel it. They're going to benefit, from that, and the
Yeah,
growth that it had for you
yeah.
to happen. So, how long did it take you to write it? Do you remember?
It took me some months. So typically, if I really sit down and write, I can get a manuscript written within 45 to 60 days. This one took me about 6 months because it was rough. It was a lot of a lot of emotions, a lot of crying, a lot of stopping, a lot of saying, God, I can't. I'm not gonna do this. I can't write this. And him saying, yes, you can do it. Like, I'm gonna get you through it. But I think just when I even reread it now, I'm like, wow, the lessons I learned that I still like
Mm,
apply to this day. I tell people probably one of my favorite chapters in the book talks about support and the lesson I learned about support, because I went through a period of isolation where I stayed on my little island, but yet at the same time I was praying and saying, God, nobody's there. nobody understands, nobody's supporting me. And he was like, yeah, because you're isolating. Like, you can't isolate and want support at the same time. And so what he taught me was how support is a two-way street. It requires you to one, communicate what it is that you
Mm-hmm.
needed, right? Because I thought, like, we all sometimes think like our family and friends are just supposed to know, right? Oh, you're my friend, you're supposed to know. It's like,
Right. You're
this
supposed to
is not
understand me. You get me. I
right.
don't have to explain
That's
all this to you. Like,
right.
oh.
Like, that's not how this works. So I had to learn that I had to communicate what I needed. But what God really showed me was not only communicate, but you also have to be open to receive what you said you need. You
Ooh, see,
can't
look, you touching on all my points. The A and live smart, ask, believe, and receive. Yes, keep going. Yes.
Yeah, so that was one of my biggest lessons because I never realized that support does require you to tell somebody, hey, this is how you can show up for me. But then
Hmm.
also, it requires you to actually receive it because we ask all day long. But are you in a position to really receive what it is that you're asking?
Yes. See, yo, A, ask, believe, and receive. Yes. Okay, you get to the point where you ask, but do you really believe you can receive what you ask for? And a
Yeah,
lot of times the answer is
no.
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 No. Oh, I can't that can't really happen. Okay, then it won't.
Exactly.
As you know, if we go back to the Bible and in the scripture for those that are, in that is the whole, what do you think the scripture about the faith of a mustard seed? Tell this mountain
Hmm.
to be moved. You got to believe in order to receive what it is that you want.
Yeah.
So yeah. So what is it that you feel like you're a fraud about? You're an imposter. Because I wrote a book about imposter syndrome.
Listen, Felicia, imposter syndrome is so real. I swear. It
Yeah.
is so real. For a very long time, I tell you, what I felt like I was a fraud about was that if people really knew the whole story, right? Because I think a lot of times we tell stories, but we tell the good, we tell the good parts, we tell the possibly good part.
Hmm.
But like, if people really knew the nitty gritty, like the fact that I battled with a addiction after I was raped, like the real stuff
Mm.
that ain't nobody really gonna tell, right? Like, how would people perceive me? And for a very long time, I stayed away from, like, I would tell stories and I would write books and I would be like, oh, okay, we could talk about this experience, that experience. Until one day God started to challenge me and was like, no, tell it all. Like, if you're gonna tell the story, tell it. Like, don't tell the parts you think people need want to hear. Like, tell it.
Mm.
And it wasn't until, like, I want to say it was my fourth book where I dived into a whole section about being an angel mom, because so many people didn't know that I was pregnant and lost a child, because it was a part of me that I was like, Jesus, no, they can't know that, because if they know that, then what are they gonna think of me? And God was like, tell it. And so when I really was vulnerable enough to put it out there, I gained a whole support system of other women that was like, me too. Like, I went through the
Mm.
same situation. But for a long time, the fraud in me was, no, you can't tell that. Girl, no, don't tell that. Because if you tell that, then you're going to lose your followers. You're going to lose this. You're going to lose that. And after I got rid of that imposter syndrome and recognized the power and transparency,
Mhm.
it was like, yeah, no, I got to live a transparent life going
So what
forward.
was the connection though of thinking that you would lose your followers because what was the story?
I think it was, honestly, I think the story was just childhood feelings of not being good enough, thinking that, I wasn't worth what I was putting out there. Again, going back to that ask, believe, and receive, right? Like, I wasn't really believing who I was putting myself out there to be, right? So to the world, it was like, oh my God, Leah, you're this most inspirational person. I'm like,
Ah, I see.
who?
Mhm.
Who you talking about? Like, people would read my bios on like interviews, and I'd be like,
Who are they talking? Oh, is that me? That's a good
oh, they
fit,
talking
right?
about me, right? And that's because I didn't believe all that these accolades and these accomplishments and all this. I didn't believe in that because I was like, ain't no way this girl from Queens, New York, that was raised up in the projects, is
Mm.
that. And God had to show me, like, but yeah, that's a part of your story, but that ain't your story. Like, let go of that thinking that because you came from unfavorable circumstances, that has to be your life.
Mm. Okay. All right. So Here's one of the things. Think about the business cards, since we are all in this LinkedIn world. So one of my things for cards is oracle cards, intuitive cards, right?
Mm.
So, as we continue to chat for a little bit and get ready to write down, would love to see what little insight question that you may think about this card that's going to come up that says, "What is it that you don't see?" Um, so I pulled the seventh chakra and the crown. So
Mm-hmm.
with this, what stands out for you about this?
Mm. You know, for me, the crown represents queendom. It represents really walking
Hmm.
in your wholeness and your purpose. And it's so funny that the crown shows up because I have a tattoo of a queen's crown.
Of course you do.
So, and
Of
it's
course you do.
always my reminder that I am a queen and that I am to walk in that and really not only walk in that but really define what that is, because I think we toss around queen and queendom a lot. You know, society tosses it, but what does that really mean? What does it really mean to be a queen?
Hmm.
And then what does that mean for me? Not what society says it means, but what does that mean according to who I say I am and who God says I am? So,
Yeah. So what does it mean for you?
you know what? A queen for me is a woman that is not afraid to fail. She keeps getting up, she keeps trying, she embraces the totality of who she is, right? Like the
Yeah.
good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, right? She embraces it because she understands that that is the makeup of who she is, right? And that's how she's able to walk into her transparency and able to walk in her boldness and the confidence of who she is, because she's not trying to be what everybody else says she is. She's just trying to be her. And so that to me is what a queen is.
Yes. Well, definitely queen, because this is just a reflection of seeing you and the fact
Mm,
that you have a tattoo of a crown, the fact that you have written 7 books and I'm sevenfold coaching. Yes. And that it is just the encouragement that you're absolutely, I think, living that life.
thank
And
you.
it is it's been such a pleasure connecting with you and
Yes.
knowing that I see you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I yeah, I see you and the work that you're doing. Thank you for that. I'm also getting a message about make sure you take your time to rest.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I receive it because I literally been telling myself I need a vacation.
That's your message because her eyes are like closed. She's at this peace state
Mm-hmm.
that yeah, this is you and you're doing these great things, but take that vacation, sis.
I am. Look, green light. Thank you for that. Because I swear, literally today, I just said, I'm like, oh, I got all this vacation time at work. It's time to take a vacation. I
It's time to
literally,
take it. And look,
yeah,
and I gotta chill. It's time for you to
yeah,
take that
it's
vacation.
time to plan it.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
where would you like to go? What are you thinking about?
You know, I love the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was planning to do maybe a cruise of some sorts, hit different islands. And right now I was looking at Carnival just the other day and I was like, you know what, Carnival's not bad for these prices.
Uh-huh.
So I'm definitely planning a 7-day cruise very soon just to
What's
get away.
7 days, right? That's 7. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Number of completion.
Just the number of completion. That is your path for sure. And that's as I would say that is confirmation. The message for you is to take that vacation, relax. It is
Yeah, I receive
it's
it.
it's
That-
it is who you are for sure.
Thank you. I receive it.
Absolutely. Well, Leah, thank you so much for being my first guest on All Intuitive Conversation. And so, as you guys are watching this, as you can see, this is all that it is, that we're just having this conversation to be able to connect and encourage each other to live smart. So, I look forward to seeing you guys here next week on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. So, Leah, just hang tight as we do this outro. I just switch over to the brands and